So I'm very happy to be here to lead the roundtable about the green transition in PSE. So thank you very much for the invitation. So the theme is enriching the dialogue between the stakeholders of the environmental transition. I'm not very good in English. I would say the green transition then. We have 7 panelists. So on my left, there is Sébastien Treyer, which is the CEO of IDRI, which is l'Institut du Développement Durable et des Relations Internationales in French. How would you translate that? Institute for
Sustainable Development and International Relations.
Oh, you're great. Okay.
It exists.
Thanks.
Very good English. Thank you very much. So on the left of Sébastien, there is Marguerite Culot-Hort, who is Director for Institutional Relations at Finance for Tomorrow, which is an association where all private, public and institutional players in the Paris financial center who wish to commit themselves to a green finance for a sustainable future. Is that okay? Okay. And on the left, we have the pleasure to have Valentina Bosetti, who is a professor at the famous Bocconi University, and she teaches environmental and climate change economics. And very interesting too, Valentina is the chairwoman of Terna, which is a company which manages the network to bring electricity to every Italian family and to every firm. In French, that would be the ERDF, I would say. And on her left, there is Katheline Schubert. What, sorry?
Rien.
No any joke about what I'm saying? Okay. Thank you very much. I hope there will be a discipline, a little bit of discipline here. Okay? So where was I? Katheline is a professor of economics at PSE. And she's associate chair at PSE too, and she's a member of the French High Council for Climate and a member of the French Council of Economic Analysis. And on her left, there is Pauline Aymonier, the head of public policy at a company which is called Tier Mobility, which is a micro-mobility provider with a range of shared light electric vehicles like e-scooters and e-bikes. Probably you use them quite often. And on her left, there is Jean Jouzel, which is a former member of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And today, which is president of Météo and Climat, and here he is. And on his left, there is the last one, but the late one,
best one.
Gilles Moec, who is chief economist at AXA Investment Managers. So we'll start the round table. So each panelist can have the microphone for, let's say, 4 or 5 minutes. We start with you, Jean Jouzel.
Yes?
You've got the microphone.
I have a microphone.
Yeah.
Yes.
Here you are.
Yeah, okay. So the question is, you asked me is, why do we need net zero at some point? Why do we need? That is very important. Why do we need simply because the opposite of net zero is accepting that global warming increase indefinitely. And this is simply unacceptable for a climatologist. It's clear. I mean, this is the point. Because why net zero? And why net zero? It's clear that we have, I think, to come back at the Paris Agreement. I mean, people know it, but the Paris Agreement, okay, you know, but this famous Article 2, that to limit global warming to 2 degrees C with respect to pre-industrial and, if possible, something like 1.5. So this was the Paris Agreement, and to this Paris Agreement was associated carbon neutrality in the second part of the century. I mean, 2050 was not mentioned in the Paris Agreement. So since then we had the 1.5. So 1.5 was really pushed by vulnerable states. We understand, because it was really, and we were not. Myself, I was not convinced that I would say half a degree counts. But this special report in 2018, and Valérie Masson-Delmotte did a lot on this report, tells us the contrary. I mean, it's really that it would be much easier for young people today to adapt in the second part of this century to climate change if limited to 1.5 compared to 2 degrees C. Half a degree count. It's very important. But what is associated to 1.5 is the carbon neutrality in 2050. So, okay, what, and I will finish on this, what is observed, and at some point we can be proud of our scientific community as a whole. I mean, 3 years, I mean, I participated to the COP over the last 20 years, and in Glasgow, I mean, people completely forget about 2 degrees C. We are only on 1.5. It was clear. And where we are now is that more than 100 countries, in one way or another, have really focused on carbon neutrality in 2050. 2060 for China, 2070 for India and Saudi Arabia. But this is important. So why do we need, and we really need this, if we want really, and this is the spirit of the Paris Agreement, if we want to keep possibility to adapt in the second part of this century. So the message, this was, I think, the main question. This is a start. I mean, so we are here probably to discuss how do we do it. No, yeah. That is another problem. But why we need it, it's for me very clear.
Okay, thanks. Valentina, you work as a chairman of Terna. You told me that there was maybe problems of information in the company, or in. So how do you live how do you work in a private company, which is publicly listed in the Milano Stock Exchange? How do you manage a company like that with the climate goals?
So I think, first of all, to me it was like living an out-body experience. It is to cross the boundary and to go and see, this completely different world. And the interesting part was when I got there to realize that the whole management of a company that builds infrastructure lasting for 30 years, I should have suspected that, but it was a shock to discover that they know everything about what we do. They know everything about the climate scenario. Yeah. They know everything about what, long-term scenarios for the transition. So they do read the IPCC report. So that was the first shock when I got there. Management knows.
Yeah, okay.
They know what they're doing. The second shock that came afterward is that the board, which I chair, is composed mostly by lawyers, a large part is lawyers, and it's very differently from the management. They have no idea what climate change is. They have very little notion of.
You mean, yeah. So you mean that shareholders do not have any?
Wait, I'm getting there because
Yeah.
then,
Yes.
Sorry.
there's people who invest in the company, and by seeing, talking with the fund manager, etc., they know what the taxonomy is. They know, what greenwashing versus real green is. The finance community really knows. The management really knows. The big problem is that the governance is kind of the idea is that the governance of a company is defining the strategy for the next 30 years.
Yeah.
They're guided by a good CEO in this case, but they themselves
And
don't
a very
know
good
much.
chairman.
And
a very good chairwoman.
But they're not really totally aware of the problem as much as these other two stakeholders. So what I learned is that stakeholders are, it's a thing that when we are in academia, we think as one thing, one body, is actually a very diverse group of people with completely different knowledge, and the capacity of knowing. We all have seen that, for example, the scenarios runs by integrated assessment models are now used in the finance community, very extensively. They actually bought some of the data. So it's the other group of stakeholders that know very little. Again, mostly lawyers. I have nothing against lawyers. I think they are fantastic people. It's that we don't teach climate, the basic climate to these people. They because mostly they are very old. So now we teach that at high school. So also politicians know very little about this problem. They understand very little about this problem. So in the ministry, very little knowledge. In the firms and in the finance sector, now we have a lot of knowledge.
Okay, lawyers and politicians are the problems.
No.
No, okay.
We have to train these
okay.
people.
And higher education is also a problem. Also.
Pardon? Sorry.
Higher education is also a problem.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Pauline, you are you told me that TIER is dedicated to green transition, and that's basically the way you live. The company has been created for green transition. Can you explain us what you are doing and what you are expecting? How you work with governments and maybe city councils and public transport companies?
Sure, gladly. Yes, so indeed, TIER Mobility has essentially a mission to change mobility for good. But that is one mission, as you can imagine, that nobody can really achieve alone. So I think micromobility industry in TIER is quite a good example of a fairly new industry that's had to work very closely with, public sector, private sector at various levels of governance since we started operating. And a few examples that I can give here is, how we work with cities, how we work with public transport operators, with academia, of course, and also more at the national level, for example, European institutions. And if I start with cities, so, we operate in 170 cities, and very early on we've had to collaborate very closely. And a great tool that we've had to collaborate with our cities, and which very much shows how regulation is key, is tenders, for example. Tender applications represent a super large share of our activities across Europe and the world. And we actually, as a company, push and encourage cities to tender our services because we feel this is a great way to actually align public sector and private sector objectives, make sure we're just on the same page. And another, I think, great tool that we have for this cooperation with cities is also data sharing. We share data about services, about our users' mobility habits with almost all the cities we operate in to make sure that they can really understand what's happening on the ground, or how our services are used, identify any gaps in the infrastructure networks to create more sustainable mobility overall. Then if we talk about public transport services, we work with, we have more than 50 partnerships with public transport services because we feel like it's key to integrate micromobility into existing governance, existing mobility systems. And to do that, well, we work with them on kind of digital level, on more commercial levels, also social, and just make sure that, we're really able to integrate and act essentially as a kind of extended arm of public transports. Another good example, of course, then is academia. The micromobility industry is super new. There's a lot we need to research, test, understand. This is what we're doing at the end of the day. We are testing new solutions. How can technology actually support our sustainable transition in urban environments? So, we've partnered with universities like Hochschule Bochum in Germany to define what we hope could be a standard for defining how what is the emission of our vehicles. We work with PSE, of course, to understand what are the actual impacts of our services in cities. Understanding how people move around in Paris and how regulation can help that.
It means you open your data to academia.
Yes.
And do you open your data to cities and councils or public transports, or do public transport companies open their data with you? Yeah.
Generally, we are very much aware of the power of our data to help transform our cities, and we're generally very keen to share it, all in a GDPR-friendly manner, of course. But yes, so as I said, we do share with almost all the cities we operate in. If public transport operators are keen to receive our data, for example, research project to understand how we can use parking to complement public transport and micromobility. Of course, we've done that in the past, and we've got some very great insights from that data sharing, and academia too, on various topics.
And do you think every mobility provider do the same? They open their data for the others, to academia and...
Can't speak on behalf of the industry and don't want to get into competitors bashing, but it really depends, right? I think...
It really depends, okay.
It's quite interesting because in the collaboration we've had with cities, data sharing, for example, has become a requirement in tenders. And once at the beginning it was not necessarily sort of positively received, it's actually set a very good... just spirit for the industry of more openness about the data, which is key for any kind of tech-based industry. So I think this shows the good relation between how regulation can actually also help the industry sort of make it common practice.
Okay, thanks. Interesting. Kathleen, your turn. So you think that much progress has been made by the private sector in understanding the climate change and the need for green transition. Can you tell us more about what
Yes, I think that it's interesting to see that very recently there has been big progress, but we need to...
Even from lawyers and politicians?
I don't know about lawyers. I think that the progress made by the private sector is bigger than progress made by politicians, actually.
Yeah,
I would say that, and but the point is that we need to transform very deeply the way we produce and very fast. And I'm not sure we are on the way to doing that, even with this big progress. And what is interesting, of course, is that the different sectors in the economy are affected very differently.
Yeah.
Some are very much more at risk in the transition to net zero than others. And this one, they do all what they can to postpone or to prevent the transition to happen, that very big lobbying or preventing that we adopt ambitious climate policy or like sort of blackmail over jobs. Okay, and so the point is how we deal with that. It is very important to deal with that, and I think we must, in some sense, we must not maintain these sectors under supervision, but we must help the people. We must help the people to do reconversion. We must do a lot of training, education, compensation, even because some of them they went into these industries, in these sectors, without knowing that it would become so, let's say, stranded at some point. Okay, so this is where we have to make the big effort, but we must also explain, we as academics, we must also explain to the industry that the transition is also a very big opportunity for firms like yours, actually, for innovation, creating new sectors, but also maybe attracting young people that want to do jobs that are meaningful for them, and also, let's say, to decrease the risk exposure, or even to get funding to have a lower cost of capital, and so on and so on. So it's it's also a big opportunity, and this has to be put forward, I think.
Okay. Sébastien, you think we certainly need to break down barriers between researchers, politics firms, and non-governmental organizations, but will it be enough?
Thanks a lot. Sorry, this is you keep the power, but I need the microphone just for. I think one of the points that I think was very, very, very well introduced by all the speakers is that. I wanted to refer to the framing of the roundtable, which is about, to some extent, my interpretation is, could we break the barriers and make better information circulate among all the stakeholders and make a better coordination? And I want to just challenge that idea by saying first that probably information is already it's the problem of public action to trigger the transition is probably not a problem only of a lack of information. And I think what our colleague from Italy told us is that many people are very well informed, but there is a lack of information somewhere. But I want to question that probably it's not an increase in information or an increase of that scientists do not communicate enough their data. This is not the problem to trigger public action. And my second point is that it's certainly we need to have multi-stakeholder approaches, which is very well illustrated by the mobility issue. But it's not only a coordination issue, there is also a problem of a negotiation issue. There are going to be both a cooperative and a distributive dimension, if I'm using the concepts of negotiation theory. There are going to be losers and winners, as Katheline just said. So the problem of collective action that we are faced with, if we want to trigger the transition, is that we need to think of the added value of research coming into that, a negotiation problem where there are losers and winners, where it's multi-stakeholder, but it's not only about coordination, it's also the idea that we need to face power relations, that there are going to be resistances, etc., etc. And so what we have learned as a think tank, so I'm heading a think tank based in Paris, is that the first point I want to stress is that we look at the manufacture of public policies, where all these stakeholders are on the table, the progressive industries and the statu quo industries, the civil society, public players at different levels and experts. And what is really interesting is to see to what extent it's very important to use research to feed the dialogue between these different players, but also that the way these different players exchange with one another can lead to new research questions that can be important. And so the research agenda, particularly in social sciences, can be really it's very interesting to see how how you formulate new questions. And so the idea is not just to better communicate from science to the stakeholders, but also to have a permanent dialogue to see how your research questions are evolving. The second point that I want to say, and that's not just about the moment that we live, where transition is the key issue, but in general, this dialogue is I think, extremely, extremely important. The second point, and I think that's my last point, is really to say, it's a particular moment in which we are. As Katheline said, I wanted to use nearly the same word. It's about industrial redeployment, like we've seen when Lorraine, Luxembourg, and Saarland had to transition out of coal and steel towards something different. I'm not sure all these regions have actually a new vision of what is their economic project, but they've tried different economic projects. So this is about the transition, and that was quite visible in a paper that was proposed, for instance, by Pascal Pascal Canfin. We need to negotiate transition, find contracts to compensate the losers, and using also the fact that some will be the winners of that transition, and try to find these agreements. If this is the situation in which we are, to negotiate for an agreement in order to unlock the transition, then definitely what we need to see is how research can participate, or new information from research can participate to that type of very complicated negotiation, really understanding how the additional research that you put into the conversation between stakeholders is going to be useful, but always manipulated by some, or used by winners, used by losers. And so it's a very strategic, the use of knowledge, of additional knowledge, is going to be extremely strategic. And that therefore my point is really to say we need to think of the role of research, of the role of additional information as something that participates to this very strategic interplay between the different actors, and not just as if the only issue was to have research that is easier to understand. It's not so much easy to make it easier to understand, but to understand what is the power of knowledge and how it's going to serve a negotiation where what we want to do is both to ensure that there is a deliberation between the different players, because for sure there is an issue of coordination. If they better understand their different positions, then they might find an agreement, but also that there are going to be at some point a distributional dimension where some are going to lose and some are going to win. And that's basically, it's a little bit, I should use examples, but that would be too long, but that's my basic point to say. Let's not look at the issue as purely an issue where what we lack is information or what we lack is coordination. It's a very strategic interplay where research is definitely going to be useful, but let's do it in a very strategic way.
Thanks a lot, Sébastien. Gilles, you are working for an insurance company which invests in green transition, or which would like to invest in green transition, but will it do it?
Easy. I will start with a statement which is possibly a bit contentious, but asset managers and asset owners care deeply about climate change. Not because necessarily we want to do the right thing, and we are in an audience of economists, so we want our dollop of self-interest and incentives to be convinced of anything. What is our self-interest? What is our incentive? Very simply because either we don't do anything about climate change, and the world warms up, and it's going to be incredibly difficult to find positive returns on any kind of financial or physical asset in this kind of world, and we have a fiduciary duty to our clients to preserve as much as possible the capital, and if possible to grow it. And in a global warming world, that doesn't work. And you will find very, very few climate deniers in the financial industry. On the other side of the equation, if you believe that the world is getting more serious about fighting climate change, and I was in Glasgow as well, it seems that we are slowly getting there, then we need to take into account the policies that are going to be implemented to fight climate change in the way we allocate capital. So for instance, something which is key to us is what is going to be the price of carbon in 2, 5, 10 years. Because if we know what the price of carbon is going to be, that is going to be a key input in the way we allocate capital to discriminate across assets. So we care a lot about this. We want it to succeed, and it's absolutely key to our investment strategies. And again, it's not necessarily because we want to do the right thing. It's the rational thing to do. Now, the complexities around this, they are manifold. And sometimes I think that I should have become a lawyer rather than an economist when doing it with an asset owner or an asset manager, because regulation is absolutely key. And very, very quickly, I would like to walk you through some regulatory issues which may help you to understand some of the very practical issues that we have. Europe, the EU, is well ahead on this. We have probably the best, the most comprehensive ecosystem in terms of green finance that the world can offer. We are way ahead of the Americans, way ahead of any Asian country. And we want to do 3 things. We want to decide what is sustainable, what is not. And basically, if I summarize horribly, it's what the taxonomy is supposed to do. We want to make sure that companies, businesses are going to tell us how they position themselves around these sustainability issues. What is their carbon footprint? How do they invest? What is also, for instance, their impact on biodiversity? That is CSDR, it's a European directive. And finally, you want to package saving vehicles, funds, in a way that will speak to savers so that they know what they buy, what kind of sustainability they buy in their funds. And that's SFDR. And one of the issues we have, and I don't want to lament the plague that we are dealing with, but one of the issues we have is that the sequence is not necessarily perfect. SFDR, so the regulation on funds, is already active. Taxonomy is not stabilized because we still have lots of political conversations on what is actually sustainable and what is not. And the answer to this is quite different in France or in Germany, for instance, see nuclear power. And finally, CSDR, forcing companies to disclose key material information about their environmental footprint. That is for later. So we are in a sort of state of co-production of going to the regulator and telling them, okay, this is what we're trying to do. Are we okay? Do we have an agreement there? So it's very advanced in Europe, but it's still extraordinarily complicated because you don't necessarily have the sequence right. And one of the issues we also need to deal with is the fact that we are very advanced, and because we are very advanced, we have this temptation to try to impose our specific green finance ecosystem to the rest of the world. But the rest of the world is moving forward. And if you've seen the latest developments in the US, it's a sea change. Biden doesn't have enough support in the Congress to change regulation, but he has control on federal agencies. And they are moving very, very quickly on green finance regulation. We need a high level of coordination on this, because otherwise we're going to see standards appearing here and there, and for global companies, that is going to be extraordinarily complicated to operate in. So my conclusion is very, very simple, is that we want to do it. In Europe, we probably are the closest to having the tools to deal with it, but it's not yet perfect. But green finance, and I would like to leave you with that, green finance is not going to save the world. Green finance may help, is probably going to help, wants to help, but it's not going to save the world, because some of the decisions that need to be made are entirely political decisions that have to be made by governments. And I come back to taxonomy. You make a decision on what is sustainable or not, and we will allocate capital. But we're not going to decide for the people of Europe what is sustainable and what is not. Stop here.
Yeah, okay. But you are invited in the Paris Agreement to make finance flow consistent with low carbon economy and resilient to climate change. How do we feel with respect to this objective? Optimistic or not? I mean, you are on the way, if I understand, but it's not so simple.
It's not so simple because one key issues we have is very simply that you don't necessarily have the right level of data or information to actually do it. To take a very simple example, carbon footprint is key. So we have, for instance, a rule. We've set ourselves a target. We want to reduce our carbon footprint by 20% by 2025. So we count our assets and we look at the carbon footprint. But to do that, you need to have a reliable model and reliable information from the businesses in which we are invested on exactly what is their footprint. And it's dynamic. It's what it's going to be in 5, 10, 15 years from now. So we have to trust also the trajectory that they publish to invest. But it's getting there.
Yeah, okay.
Well, you already trust, you have to trust companies for their financial trajectory too. That's your job to try to anticipate.
And that's where active management gets interesting, in the sense that you could be blind and simply take whatever comes from rating agencies, for instance, in terms of what is safe financially or not, and Moody's rates you investment grade, so I buy. Or you could consider, I'm going to try to be a bit
smarter.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to select the right ones. I guess 90% of the population here has at least one day believed in the market efficiency theory, so probably you know that it doesn't really work, but we still try to believe that we can select the right assets. It's exactly the same thing with green solutions.
Yeah. Okay. So, Marguerite, Gilles just said the green finance is not going to save the world. What do you think?
I think that, the finance is not going to save the world, but it's going to take his part. That's what she said.
Yeah.
The corporate needs to, the citizens needs to, because savings is also important. You didn't mention MiFID ESG, by the way. But it's also important that the citizen, and we know that a lot of citizens, and we know that the students would love to do more and take their part for the ecological transformation. So everybody has to be able to do something and to be conscious that they can do something. So finance can do something. And Gilles said that, for example, AXA do a lot of things that we have to say, and you are a pioneer, and we have to say that French finance is quite pioneer on and do something for biodiversity, for financing corporates like the one that got your name. Well, sorry? Pauline present, and there is quite a big role for finance to stop financing corporates or activities which can't be part of the ecological transformation. And there will be winners and losers. That what you say, Sébastien, that's for sure. And we have to be sure that there won't be no one left behind at some point, and that's the just transition that you mentioned at the beginning. And even on that, the financial actors can do something. They can engage, they can dialogue with corporates, they can play their part, and that's what you mentioned too with the asset owners and asset managers. They can do something. We saw that during the General Assembly. They can talk and say I don't agree, and you have to change, and we can help you to change at some point. So they can play a role doing that. They can lead the way, and we have a number of financial actors who do that, leading the way by financing innovative corporates, or talk to corporates and say, maybe you're not going to do this kind of project, but you might do something else, and we can go with you if you do that. So that's the engagement stewardship action. So I think that financial, the Paris Financial Center, for example, or European financial actors, and everybody, they need to do something. The global finance is global. That's what you said too. So it's sometimes difficult to be pioneer and to do to act at first, but the European actors do that, and they lead the way, and it's important to go like this and to move forward like that. And American, they are late, but they move quite fast. They will be fast as usual. So we just need to go together. That's what you say. You do partnership with cities and corporate cities and academy, and you do you say the same thing about you lead. You are chair, and you know that the manager knows, and they want to go, and there might be a problem with lawyers and politicians, but they would go. They need to go. We don't have time, so it's time to scale up. And I think that everybody here play their part, and you will do your part too. And like that, we can hope that we will do it. We need to be positive. Otherwise, after what's the point?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. So if we want to enrich the dialogue between the stakeholders to green for the green transition, then Jean Jouzel, there's a way to do it, which is the COP at the end. where researchers, politicians, private sector, they talk and they together and they choose what to do. Do you think it's an efficient way to go to the green transition, or do you think we should change the governance?
Okay, in principle, it's I am quite easy with this system of on one side IPCC, I mean the scientific community, on the other side I mean the governance, decision makers. It works correctly, and when you look at the Paris Agreement, it really relies on the conclusion. We don't make recommendation in IPCC. In conclusion on the fifth report, if you go at obviously Glasgow, I mentioned the fact that this net zero, I mean this carbon neutrality in 2050 is really very recent. 3 years after, we have 120 countries which have really, put in their objective in one way or another this objective, this carbon neutrality. So for me, the problem is not this link between climate community and, I would say, the political area. So is it really in the action? As you know, I mean, there is a gap between what is, including in our country. Okay, so at some point, looking at this, I think that COP are really good. I mean, at a good way. This being said, I was 60 years.
Basically, you don't think there's a problem of information in the politics?
It took time, but I think yes, there is. I think yes, politicians are well informed. Okay, adoption procedure. I mean, the adoption of the IPCC report is very useful because once they are adopted, it's really. When you start Paris Agreement, you don't discuss of the science. You say, okay, our dream as scientists is that really, our reports are used by politicians for political decisions. This is the case at some point. This is the case in the text, but not in reality. This is a problem for me. I was involved, 15 years ago with Jacques Chirac in the, what we do if we want to do more than the COP, because it's only, we have no way to impose in this system. So the idea was to have the idea of Jacques Chirac, an organization of World Organization of the Environment, which will have. So this is not a bad idea. It could be also discussed, but we went nowhere. We could have, if we have, with respect to OMC, the world, we should have something which has the same rights and the same possibility. We are not equivalent to OMC, and this is very bad because we have no real in the field of environment. We have no real possibility to impose this objective. So, but it's not the COPs themselves which are. I think it's nice to have the COP, to have all these people discussing.
But I would tell you that the World Trade Organization, because
that's it.
They don't have any police, really. They have some.
They have some.
But not that much.
No, okay, I agree.
China did what they wanted. So on the international level, the problem is always the same. There is no real governance and no policeman. But for example, Katheline, do you think the COP works?
Actually, not very well. I think it's the glass is half empty and half full. In some sense, it works because it makes the country talk together. But when you see that you have to reconcile the interest of Saudi Arabia and of Sweden, you understand very, very soon that this is going to be very, very difficult. Okay, and so.
I saw that yesterday Aramco, the oil Saudi oil company, is the most valuable company today.
Yeah. Yes.
More than Apple.
So yes.
So we're talking about green transition, but
No.
maybe the asset managers are not that green sometimes. I don't know.
I want to be short, but I mean, another. The fact that it does not talk very well. I mean, when I start my scientific career, the emissions were 27 billion of tons of equivalent CO2. They have doubled. Well, this is the reality.
Yeah. Yeah.
Si, il y en a un. Toujours. Merci.
Okay. And so, Sébastien, you said that information is not the real problem today. It's more a negotiation problem. Do you agree with Sébastien, or do you think it's the real problem is negotiation today?
You cannot possibly ask Sébastien because
No, he agrees probably with him, but you.
No, yes, I think the balance of power is a very important point, and so we have. In France, it's a different story. The incumbent technology is another, yet to be discussed politically whether it's a taxonomy compliant or not. But the incumbent, I mean, we have in Italy, for example, companies that are based on fossil fuels and traditionally have been very much intertwined with the government. And because in the government we don't have many highly skilled technical people with a PhD in energy engineering, typically it's been these big companies that were whispering the optimal policy, to politicians where, for example, they go to discuss in Europe. They go to Brussels. Who do they do their briefing with? These people who have naturally some interests in some of the incumbent technologies. So I think the problem of power can be resolved if we really start to put high-skilled people into the institutions. So I think I don't know France. I have the feeling that you have a different problem maybe. Okay. In Italy, for sure, a big problem is that of having high-skilled people, technical people who really understand, the transition, the technologies, the intermittency. Otherwise, people will say, okay, if we go 100% renewables, there is a problem of intermittency. Nobody has ever said we should go tomorrow 100% of renewables. But it's so easy to use information in a way that is not really informing and to, play these games. So we really need to have people with high skills in institutions, and that will solve the problem.
Can I jump on that? I will for sure agree with that, and it relates to the point I was making earlier about data sharing. And micromobility is a new joiner, and we're trying to get a seat at the table essentially, and sharing that data, giving the information is key for us to actually kind of show the impact of our services. What we see nevertheless is that on the other end, the information is not always received in the right way, or understood in how it should. So, we have teams of developers, of tech people who can digest all of this, but from the city perspective, we're actually trying in that partnership to do a lot of education work in a way to help them digest this information to support their policy making, their urban planning, etc. So very much relates with your Italian points.
Sébastien, vous êtes d'accord avec ce que Valentina vient de dire sur le fait que... Oui,
you switch in English.
Microphone. Ah ouais, il n'y a pas...
Sorry. Now with the microphone, it comes back.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your comprehension. Do you think if we have highly skilled managers, then that will change the way we will look at green transition? I mean, is that it's a big is that important?
I could definitely completely agree with what you've been saying on Italy, and the same for France. I mean, we see the importance of getting the right information on climate and on net zero strategies to the boards. We have in France, it's actually an Italian lady, Monica De Virgilis, who is in the board of SNAM, the gas utility or the gas network utility in Italy. She's heading the French chapter 0, which is about how to ensure that the administrators, those whose profession it is to be administrators in the boards, that they have the right knowledge about climate. And she's trying to develop education, executive education for them in France, like the Institut Français des Administrateurs. And I think this is definitely something that matters a lot for them to be informed about what you're saying, so that you can really ensure that the quite technical discussions that we need to have on energy systems, but I would say the same about food systems or transportation systems, are not just wiped away by things that are too easily said. I can, for instance, also testify about the fact that at IDRI we are used to compare the French energy transition and the German energy transition. And very often in France, the German example is just used to say that renewables are not...
You can speak French now.
I think the batteries are low. That's the problem. Thanks a lot. No, just to say that the example about the fact that with the phasing out nuclear and putting a lot of emphasis on renewables development, Germany is now has to buy electricity from France, is generally used to say, look, the Germans don't know what they need to do, and that's really something we try to fight against. And one of the roles of research, of think tanks, is to try and make the best of the experiences of another country and just take the right solutions or the right lessons from what is not working in the German energy transition, but also what is working. And there are issues of culture. I think, again, I like the way that you were questioning the fact that we have a very specific idiosyncratic problems in Italy and France and in Germany. But it's also the beauty of looking at, very often in France on energy systems, we have the impression that if we don't have a central organization, it's not you cannot optimize it. And the Germans are just saying, if you have a central system, it's very generally not the best way to optimize, because you're just not letting creativity happen, etc. And I think these cultures are also very important, but we need to ensure that the right knowledge is taken from the different positions. So that would be my reaction to yes, definitely having a better skills, better education is also important, but then also look not just at I think that the example was really right, because to some extent it was also for them to be able to see to what extent knowledge can be, or partial knowledge can be used in a very strategic way by the incumbents or the new entrants, etc. I don't know, a reaction to a question that you have not asked me, so I will wait for you to come to it. But it was about the global level. Would you agree that I jump on the conversation that was had?
Of course.
No, I think what
you've got the microphone. You have the power.
Yeah, that's right. But I don't want to overuse it. Just one point. I think it was really very interesting to see what Gilles was saying about the fact that there is a kind of a race to set the standards of green finance. That's my interpretation. I put it away further than what you said, and we hear a lot of Indonesian, African players, Indian players who are telling us, be sure that the type of do not go too fast to a codification of those standards, because we've seen that on accountants' standards. we now have accountability standards that are the ones, the Americans instead of the Europeans, and we are now stuck in a way that these accountancy frameworks are not good for the transition. So please do not do that race in a way that would just then paralyze us into standards that do not function, and specifically do not prevent us, Indians, Indian governments, Indian cities who have really problems in accessing international financial markets, do not set standards that would prevent us from doing the transitions that we need. Of course, there was a big discussion on gas in Glasgow, so that was about let us use gas, which is something that is very complicated to discuss. But it was further than that, the idea that we need also to think the standards that we have in Europe as something that is setting the standards for the rest of the world, and we should think about what are the impacts for these other players. And I think that global cooperation is going to be extremely important on that point. It's not discussed within the COP frameworks. The COPs are places where we discuss other things, but this cooperation on the financial standards is, I think, a key element of the future.
Okay. Kathleen, you are a member of the High Council for Climate in France. And so you gave not advices, but I would say
reports.
Pardon?
A lot of reports
to the politicians. And how could we make the process better, or do you think it's efficient today?
No. I think it's not really efficient. I think what we try to do is to give helpful recommendation. Let's say, for instance, I just give you some examples. For instance, in France, we have a lot of standards, command and control instruments. Let's say in building, for instance, an incredible number of norms, of standards, and nobody ever evaluated them. So we try to say, okay, when you put in place a policy, please evaluate. And so this is very much linked with what we do here. So try to see whether it works or not, and etc. And even that, it's something that was useful to say to the governments, and not just for specific standards, but also for laws in general. What is the climate impact of a law on mobility, for instance, or things like that? So this is basic messages that we economists we find obvious, but I think it's important to. And also there is another point we repeat and repeat again. It is that if we want that there is a real climate policy, it has to be very high on the agenda of politicians, because it is not the case now, clearly. Yeah. We have in France something that is called low carbon national strategy, except at the Ministry of the Environment, nobody never heard about that. Okay, so it's a sort of dreamed world, so where there is a strategy, it's very well done for the future to decarbonize the French economy. But if you talk to people at the Treasury, for instance, they don't know. Okay, so this kind of thing we try to repeat. Of course, we also talk about instruments, carbon tax, blah blah blah. But there are also very very practical things that I think, okay. But is it heard? I don't know. Now everybody talks about ecological planning. I think it's more Mr. Mélenchon than us, actually. Okay.
Okay, but if academia is not listened by the politicians, then it's
maybe they hear a lot, a little. Maybe when you repeat and repeat and repeat this type of message, at some point it will percolate. Okay, I'm not sure. I don't know.
But to be honest, when we had the massive policy response to the pandemic in 2020-21, what I think was reassuring is that when governments sat together in Europe to decide on what kind of fiscal debt mobilization system we're going to put together, and we did, and it's massive, it's 700 billion euros, it's not nothing. We did this on what? On digitalization and on the fight against climate change.
Yeah.
And in some cases, I think it was designed in a way that we were leveraging public opinion in countries which are often quite frugal, don't like debt mutualization, don't like active fiscal policies, look towards the east of the Rhine. But because it was about the environment, it actually worked. So it may not be always where it should be in terms of the ranking of priorities, but there is serious money that is put on the table. That's a big change.
Okay. No, just wanted to add something on the High Committee on Climate. What you produced is exactly the type of public policy evaluation that we had been lacking before. No, sorry, it's different. I cannot judge, but it's also difficult for you to judge your own activity. I think from my point of view, before that, the debate was the president does nothing. That was the NGOs, and the government was saying, but we already tried a lot. And I think I regret a lot that your reports are much more precise than that. They say what has been tried, what has failed, what has not been tried, and therefore you could say that the government has not done enough. And that is something that we lack a lot in France, to have that public policy evaluation discussion. Lamentably, the government still, I'm sorry, I'm going to say that, the government reacts as if the High Committee on Climate is now on the side of the NGOs and just saying, a bunch of activists saying that the government does not enough, which is not what you say in your reports. No. And thus, I think there is something where I hope that with the new government and if there is this emphasis on ecological planning, whatever the results of the legislative elections, that this capacity to contribute to because it's not just about the government that does nothing, it's about some norms that are not functioning. So there is a lot of richness in your report that is, if we had this culture of public policy evaluation and if that would structure the way we look at policy making, it would a little bit ease out the situation where the only thing that we see is a lack of political will. I don't believe that there is a lack of political will, and I'm not saying anything positive or negative about the last government. It's just that they have tried things, maybe not enough, and a lot of the things they've tried have not functioned. We need to say that and learn from that experience.
And if the government does not listen to you, or at least not enough, do you think or maybe everybody can answer, do you think that to choose random citizens, as the French government did 1 year ago, is a way to engage, I mean, the civil society, the non-governmental organizations, the citizens, the private sector? Would you say that's possibly a solution, or it's been just a mess? And
I would say that a very good point is that you see, if you take citizen 150 random, more or less, and you explain them very well the topic, you give them the information. In the end, they understand. Okay, they understand what it is about, and they are able to think sensibly on that. But I also think that it's a pity to dismiss the role of experts, as we tend to do now. It's very, very complex, this balance between, let's say, democratic decision on topics like that, democratic decision through convention, citizen convention, and listening to experts that have the expertise, basically. And so I had a very bad experience with the citizen convention, because they asked me to come and talk about carbon tax.
Yeah.
Okay, and so I started talking about carbon tax, and 5 minutes later, the guy that stood up and said, bullshit, carbon tax, or also tax, blah, blah, blah. And the whole assembly never talked about carbon tax anymore after that. It was over, because he was very, very charismatic, the guy. And so it was over. They were totally frozen on that topic, and so they came out with stuff that was just standards, okay, or small measures that do not add up, that are not enough to, okay.
No, but
Okay.
no, but maybe it's because he was passionate, no?
Excuse me, Sébastien.
Okay. So I spend a lot of time with this climate convention. So Sébastien too. So
I know that.
no, okay. So and I am really much more positive than Katheline. I mean, when you look at the recommendation of this climate convention, they are very useful. And I only regret that only 20% of them were taken into account in this climate last climate law. So it's clear. So I am more positive than I think it was useful, and it's still very useful. And it did last week when we met President Macron is one. I know.
It was not too bad.
It was not too bad, but it's one point I raise. I mean, it's clear. What do you do with climate convention recommendations?
Yeah. Okay. But I think it's basically that it's quite positive if people listen to academia and experts, and they propose some laws and decisions to the government, then it's very positive for the future. But
I think it's easier.
It's not really a democratic process, because they don't have to face electors, I guess, when they're not coming back home with angry electors.
But first, two things. So first, experts were involved, and Sébastien was one of these experts. I mean, his field. You were part, but as an expert.
Yeah.
And so citizens were not hoping to make the law. They were only hoping to give this recommendation to the parliament. So this is the way to do. I mean, it's not. I don't. I mean, this. So I really. I'm positive with the climate convention in this.
I just wanted to interject one element that I think is it's extremely important. What Katheline was saying, that we should look at what experts can do in this very complicated moment, and it's really not participation instead of expertise. And I think we need to look at how to make that happen. And I remember this experience that you have had.
We were there, so I do remember.
So I don't want to explain too much about that, but I think a lot of the complicatedness of the Citizens' Convention was that the citizens had the impression that the president was putting the burden on them to decide of a carbon tax that he didn't want to decide himself. And that's why you were kind of, collateral damage of that thing. What I heard, I'm sorry, because it was really very bad if the conclusion is that in the end, those citizens don't want to listen to experts. I think it was, at some point, it was really the case, but what I've also experienced in the group that I was working with, that was the group on food, and they really discussed, should we at some point propose a tax on meat, because that was a proposal from a Dutch NGO. And they really had a very interesting deliberation process where they discussed the fact that they didn't see how to make it fair, and so they had this kind of a deliberative process. They were not the economists to discuss how a tax can be made progressive, etc. But I think what was really important, and that's my point to your question also about they are not democratic because they are not accountable to constituencies. My vision, there was a lot of confusion about the different political philosophies behind the Citizens' Convention. Some people proposing that they would substitute to parliament. My personal vision was, like Jean, I think, expressed, they were a preparation of parliamentary processes or something that puts elements on the agenda. And what matters is not that they vote on something, but that because they discuss among one another, they produce new formulations of a political problem. For instance, what I saw, they were asked, what can we do to reduce by 40%? And they answered, we will tell you, but we can't separate that problem from biodiversity and ecosystems. That was a consistent message that they had. And that came out very strongly from the deliberative process. And that's the beauty and the force and the virtue of deliberation for my standards. And that's something that puts on the agenda a new issue. And I don't know, has any of you heard about the conference about the future of Europe, la conférence pour l'avenir de l'Europe? They did a tremendous job. They put on the table, so a deliberative process, multilingual, extremely complex. They put on the table the issue that yes, the Green Deal matters. Yes, deliberative processes are important because we are going to need them, because we are going to have to discuss about social policies in Europe, because we won't do the Green Deal without social policies. That type of messages came out of the deliberative processes. They didn't tell the governments or the Commission what to do, but they say, hey, guys, you have a problem there. And I think we need to make that more known, because that's the way they put new problems or new formulations of political problems on the agenda is what is extremely important.
Do you have something like that in Italy?
I wanted to say something, but she wanted to speak before. I interrupted her too many times. So no, please.
Don't be shy. You can speak.
No, I was just want to jump on what you said about the just transition. Actually, I think that what you said was true about the guy, and to say that you were collateral damage when you talk about tax and carbon tax. Yeah. But it was in the middle of it was just after the Gilles jaune crisis, so it was just obvious that it's going to be an issue on this, and there is it was an issue which was supposed to be tackled by government and public, and I'm not sure that it's still on the agenda, on the top agenda, because we can see that there is no just transition public plan, even if European Union said that each member state is supposed to plan that kind of transition without not leaving anyone behind. But this is the thing. So everybody needs to play a part, and the citizens, as well as the corporates, as well as the financial actors, but the public has to do their part too. And probably on this just transition thing, they need to be there, and they need to lead the way, and they need to say, okay, you need to sit on the table with the trade unions, with the communities, with the students, with the NGOs, with the research, with the finance, and we have this issue, and we need to talk what is the difficulties that everybody has to meet, and how we can face them, and how we can tackle that issue together. Otherwise, after it's not going to work. Yeah, as you said, finance has to play the part, but it's not going to be able by itself to fight climate change or to lead the society on a transformation move or something. So the thing about the deliberation and the citizen convention and so on, it's great. It's nice because everybody can see that if you are informed, of course you want to go, you want to change, and you want to. And it's the same for the corporates. There is quite I know two initiatives like this, Le Grand Défi and another initiative, I don't remember the name, but it's more or less the same thing. The leaders, the CEOs are around the table, and there are experts who are explaining, what's going on and how we can do in a better way to change and succeed. And they say, okay, we can do that. I think we can go we can go back inside our company and we can talk with our employees, with our financial counterparts, and we can do something together. Okay. So it's just a question of I think dialogue, coordination, and be sure that everybody are on the same page.
Okay.
No, I just wanted to say two things. First, we did an experiment. We actually did put this I know nothing about anything in Parliament with the 5-star movement, and I think that doesn't work. So, I mean, deliberative processes are a good idea, but to put them actually in the Parliament is not a good idea.
This political party, they maybe they didn't listen to the good experts.
I don't think, I mean, their main point was we are not listening to experts because this
They
is
are
the elite
experts. Yeah,
and they are experts,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
you know nothing about education. Okay, so you become the Minister of Education. So that was the main spirit. Because you don't know nothing, then your creativity is gonna, I don't know what was it. So I don't think, but the process, the deliberative process is a completely different story, and I believe it works well. On the problem of having people listening to experts like you, is that once you're talking about climate change, that is a scientist at the end kind of accept that. When you're talking about the solution, you have two problems. First, you're an economist. You've lost the faith of humanity in 2009 forever, sort of. So you still have to regain the faith that people might have on you.
You don't like politicians, lawyers, and economists?
No.
That's a bit too much.
I don't,
Okay.
but look, in the IPCC process, Working Group 3, economists were on purpose left out because nobody wanted economists anymore to be there. So it's a big problem that of economists with so that may be played against you.
Well, you know,
And the second
there are economists in working
we,
groups.
we have little time to go. Maybe we could.
I mean, it's much easier when the expert is a woman to just say, "Shut up! You know nothing. Carbon pricing is bullshit." So I think it's much easier for people to stand up and tell you, "You know nothing."
Yeah.
It's just you look more credible than her. For most people, not for me, but for most people.
Believe me, when Valérie Masson-Delmotte was, at the climate convention, okay, she was very okay. No, this is not true. This is not true.
Okay. Well,
unfortunately.
Maybe you can take the microphone and ask some questions to the panelists. Do you have questions? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, so I would like to come back to the notions of winners, losers, and negotiation. I think a major issue we have is that a large part of the winners are not yet born, so and we cannot negotiate with them. So I think given that we have a majority of losers from the potential policies who are currently living, how do we make these people negotiate and support policies that would generate a loss for them? So I think this is a little bit connected to the question of governments not doing too much. I think right now the governments do not have so much support from the population to implement strong climate policies. So this would be a bit my question. How do we make all these people negotiate and support policies that can generate a loss for them?
I think I basically agree with you that there needs to be I think we need at some point to look at our institutions to ensure that there is more space for the long term and for those generations that are not there in decision making. And I believe if you look at corporate, the statute of corporate decision making, I just don't want to overestimate what's happened to Emmanuel Faber, but the way that he tried to be innovative in designing the business model of the future was then sanctioned quite harshly by the shareholders. There were probably other problems. I don't want to say that he was just immune of any mismanagement, etc. So, but just I see that as something where we might need, in that case, if you want to negotiate the ambitious decision for a company like Danone, the way the capitalistic system is organized might need to evolve, and that's what we try to do. That's what France tried to do with the law on companies. So there are things of that type of framework that are changing and that might need to change, and maybe the same for political decision making. So how to introduce more long term. Nevertheless, I have a little bit of a disagreement with you on the fact that in many cases you have the companies and the people with the skills who are from the future of the transformation, the new entrants. I don't want to just look at you, but you're representing some of the companies that are might be the winners of a transition of mobility, and you have the laggards. And that's what I'm saying, that we need to also look at how to ensure that there is the coalition of those who might be winning is stronger than the coalition of those who are for statu quo. And if I look at food systems, there is a configuration of power where the Majority Farmers Union in Europe has a tremendous amount of political power, while there are lots of food companies that are actually have more jobs and more share of the GDP, but that are less powerful politically than the farmers' union. So we need to also look at how to make those who have who are those the winners of the future, how we can be sure that they have more voice than the others. So that's just to say that it's not completely true that the winners are not there.
Hello, thank you for the conversation. I would like to come back to the last point that was discussed about the position of the experts in this debate. And I would like to address maybe the experience of COVID, which I think could have been an opportunity to legitimate the place of experts. And we saw that there were actually not a consensus even among experts who should have been helping the policymakers, and therefore I would like to have your opinion about, would you consider this was a missed opportunity, could have helped economists to enter the discussion for the climate transition? And if you think, for instance, in France, if we think of Dr. Raoult, did it actually undermine the position of experts? Thank you.
C'est Gilles qui répond.
Ah, c'est Gilles.
Mais non, il est désigné.
Please go.
You go.
I'm a private
Difficult
sector.
question.
Yes, private sector.
that side, but the wrong side of the force on this. First, on the role of experts in general, and in the fight against climate change in particular. I'm not sure that the issue is that we have experts with different opinions, and that we could get controversies around what the experts say, provided there's a minimum of consensus, which I think exists now. For me, the issue is that, and that gets me very, very far away from my comfort zone, but we are operating right now in liberal democracies in a situation where the usual traditional political families have exploded, or where some of them have dramatically declined in influence. So there's a lack of structure in the debate anyway, not just on climate change, but almost on anything, because the usual families are not there. And I have no beef with experts from political family A talking to MPs from political family A, and so on and so forth. That is absolutely normal. Experts have different opinions and they talk to different constituencies. The problem I think we have is that constituencies are much less defined than they were 50, 70 years ago. I was thinking about it. For instance, let's take the end of the 40s, beginning of the 50s. The big European traditional political families had a fairly set opinion on the big issues of the time. If you took in the 1950s what the Social Democrats, what the Christian Democrats, what the Communists, what the Liberals thought, you could design it and define it in probably half a page. Today, it's extraordinarily complicated, first, to know which families are currently structuring the debate, and B, what they think. And climate change is just, for me, a sort of exaggerated version of this. That it's extraordinarily complicated for any politician right now to internalize the various threats of climate change, because in general, at the moment, they're a bit at a loss in coming up with anything that looks like a sort of unified theory of political action. And that, I think, is really one of the issues. I don't think there's necessarily a lack of information. There's always a lack of information, and information could always be higher. There's a lack of capacity to make the trade-offs explicit. I think we kind of know what the trade-offs are. At least economists kind of know what the trade-offs are when it comes to climate change. We know that it's going to be around carbon tax, carbon pricing, investment in renewables, and so on and so forth. And then we'll have the question of just transition and how we apportion the cost according to the social capacity to absorb it. We know the trade-offs, but what is lacking is political families in front willing to say, yes, that is my choice. That is going to be the trade-off I'm putting in front of you. No one is doing it.
Great answer.
Yeah, good.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other question?
Yes, I have a question for Mr. Moec as well about what you said about shareholder engagement. So the fact that the idea that as significant shareholders of some of the most polluting companies, you have the power to push them to transition faster. So on paper, that's a really great idea. As you rightly said, it aligns financial and climate incentives, since as universal owners, you have an incentive to maximize the market beta of your portfolio and not to care much about individual companies' performance. But that's the theory. But when you look at the reality of shareholder engagement, it's quite underwhelming. For example, when you look at AXA IM's votes last year that supported Shell's so-called climate transition plan, or even Total so-called climate transition plan that still plans to drill new oil and gas fields, isn't it a bit inconsistent? And my question would be, what are the key red lines you use to assess the credibility of climate transition plans? Thank you.
Okay, oil and gas is a very good example of that. On oil and gas, you could say, I don't want to touch this with a barge pole. I just don't want to get into that. And you have some asset managers who make that choice. If you don't do it, someone else will, and the companies you don't like will actually continue to exist. Another option is to say we want to push the companies that we think have the capacity to do it to go in the right direction. And this is where selection comes into play. And to come to the point, you mentioned a big French oil company. The reason why we supported the SOC, the Say on Climate last year from Total, is because we thought that the company had the financial capacity and the plan in terms of investment for the future to turn it around, to turn its product mix. It was not perfect, and we never said it was perfect, but at least there was a reaction from the company which was saying, okay, we understand that we need to reduce our reliance on fossil fuel. This is how we're going to do it. And these are the types of investment that we are ready to put in place to get there. Some companies won't do it. Some companies won't do it possibly because they don't believe it's possible or because they don't believe in the fight against climate change. That's the reason, for instance, why we disengage from a lot of American-based oil and gas companies, because they just don't want to listen to that. And we can also make the choice to say, look, you might want to do the right thing. You're saying lots of very, very nice things, but actually we don't think that financially you will have the capacity to do what you're going to do, to do what you're saying you're going to do. It's complicated, and it takes to a lot of people in the company quite a lot of time to really reflect on it. And again, it's not perfect, but it's trying to find those companies which have the best chance to survive in the transition and to continue to provide return and to provide capital to the savers while participating to the decarbonization. Other option is to say, I don't want to touch it, and I accept that it can be a choice for some ethical investors who just decide to do that. If you're big and if you're global and you want to be everywhere in the geographically and be a global investor, you need to make choices and you need to try to be selective. That's what we're trying to do. And one thing we're introducing is a policy which we call 3 strikes and you're out, which is basically to say, look, we think you're not doing the right thing, and we tell you now that if you do not improve your approach, within the next 3 years, we will just divest. It's to try to find a compromise between not participating at all, divesting, and engaging. You can't do this for every company. You have to choose your targets. But again, not perfect, but it's an imperfect world.
No, and I think if I just may, if you go in a coalition, it might work sometimes better. You got the climate action 100 plus, which is quite interesting. You will have the nature 100 too. I think it's nice if you go collectively. And if you are big, like AXA, it's of course, you have weight. So, but if you are a small financial actor, you might be together and have some weight at some point. And if you go and do engagement with a timeline, because that's the timeline which is very important, and you do that for deforestation, for example, which is a very good thing. It's like that you might go forward, I guess.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So we have talked about Total, which is what can be the best or the worst in terms of activities. Maybe to Pauline, in the micro-mobility, it's really a new company. It's a disruptive business model because it's a startup and everything. You have to be very agile to adapt to regulation everywhere. Can you tell us a little bit more about how typically public actors, cities, notably, have forced you and how, or incentivize you to transform your business model and also the investors, because in terms of business model.
Sure. So I think essentially it's not necessarily that cities sort of, you said forced us, if I heard it right. I wouldn't say that cities forced us. I think quite the opposite. You know, as you said, it was a very disruptive new thing that arrived, and I think we had to showcase actually that our business model was sustainability based, that we wanted to be the most sustainable one. So, you know, we all had the memories of the start of the micromobility industry, and it was actually very difficult to kind of come in at this time to say that we wanted to do things differently in a way. But I think it started a very nice dialogue with the city to, again, really showcase what the impact of our services could be. In terms of investors, I think the fact that the company could probably be one of the winners of the sustainability transition is actually the reason also why they invested in the company. So, you know, it's not something that anyone had to force on us in a way. But I think what is interesting as well, and in the role with academia, to come back to the kind of expert point as well that we were making earlier, I think that we're really actually as a corporate waiting for academia to, provide us with that information, to actually be that kind of neutral actor that can bring the city's interest, the investors' interest, the private sector. So I think it's really interesting to hear that governments are not necessarily seeing you as the expert. One thing that I am seeing as a problem, though, in relation to the cities, in relation to academia for a new startup, is just the speed of things. We want you to advise us on the regulatory framework, but we're seeing that the development of the company is just too fast for it. Mm-hmm. And there's just really a need to align on our timelines and align on the messaging, what we're trying to achieve, and make sure that regulation is able to kind of drive us there rather than us trying to shape it in a way.
I had a question coming back to the conversation between the deliberative process and experts. How big do you think a barrier, or rather a hurdle, is the current media systems? And do you think, because we see that most of the media is now private and corporate, and they have an obvious bias towards maintaining the status quo, so do you think reforming that aspect of the media communication between experts and the general public would help communication and make better policies?
Good question. Who wants to answer?
Katheline.
Guillaume, tu peux répondre, c'est l'homme de l'art.
Guillaume, oui, exactement, parce que moi je pense ici que...
No, well, it's in my contract. I can't answer the question. No, but what can I say? I don't know what to say.
Maybe I can say just a little point. There is a question of the independency of experts, which is very important, because this is something that we insist a lot upon on the Council in Climate, because very often the public does not perceive experts as independent, but as having an agenda, and so they are confused, they don't believe in what we say. So, and on the top of that, you are an economist, so it's over, okay? But, okay, please.
I guess the problem is that you need to have just real free medias, but of course if they are owned by big companies investing in fossil energies, it's a real problem. But at the end, I still believe in I would say in free speech, and that the problem is to have several different medias with different opinions and views, and that is probably one of I don't know if it's the government to make it real, but no, I don't know. I think obviously journalists, I would say it's an intellectual profession. It's of course, I did not study at PSE, but I'm not that stupid. And no, I think we as journalists are really interested in the process of green transition, because we live in big cities, and we should be part of it. I guess that it is the ownership of the medias that could be a problem in some countries, and maybe in this country. No other questions? Sorry, here we go. Okay, sorry. A question.
So there's this running gag of when you ask people who want to do something against climate change, everyone raises his hand. And when you ask who actually want to do something, like when they have to do, like there's nobody anymore. And for instance, for food, we know that changing habits is very hard, and policymakers, they don't want to make unpopular decisions. And when they do, there are some backlash. Like for instance, 1 year ago for the vegetarian meals in Lyon, there was a huge national backlash for something that was not even done for environmental reasons. So how do you overcome these difficulties to actually go from the intention to action and to convince people to make unpopular decisions when they're policymakers, or to change habits that are very anchored in their everyday life for consumers? Or I think you could do the same for other kind of actors, but I think, yeah.
I'll take it, so I'll be very short and you can all go drink. I think this relates back to the question of experts. There is a lot of evidence that people stop believing in experts who are not walking the talking. And so the first point to convince people is to do something that is hard, is that you start doing it yourself. So I think the first point, or one of the step forward for experts, is to start eating their hams when they fly on their planes. If they want to convince people they should eat less meat, because you stop being credible. So it's very unpleasant, I know. But
so it means you took the train to go from Milan to Paris, I guess.
Yes.
Great.
Now,
okay.
To go back, I came from Rome, to disclosure. So coming from Rome, I took the plane. I'm going back to Milan by train.
Okay, thanks. Thanks. So, no other questions? Then goodbye, and maybe see you tomorrow.
Merci.
Thank you very much.
Merci.